It's our great honor and privilege to welcome David Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Hampden-Sydney class of 2024, I salute you. Congratulations. You know this day is real because you are hungover, your parents are proud, your professors are shocked, and I'm in awe. Over the course of your time here at Hampden-Sydney, you've learned many new things. You've learned to dominate classroom discussion while doing none of the reading. You've learned to spend as much as 15 seconds slaving over a term paper with the help of ChatGPT. You have learned the skill of staring at me right now in what looks like expressions of rapt attention, even though you're all fast asleep. Whenever I'm honored to give addresses to graduating classes, I try to pass along a few valuable pieces of information. First, this may be your first college graduation. You should know that when you get your degree, it's customary to tip President Stimper 10 or 20 bucks just to show him he did a good job. It's also important to tip your commencement speaker, usually something in the low four figures. The other ritual of these exercises is that the school picks a person who has had some career success to give a speech saying that career success doesn't matter. Several years ago, it was the fashion for people like Steve Jobs and J.K. Rowling to give addresses on how much you can learn from failure. From this, you learn that failure is wonderful if you happen to be Steve Jobs and J.K. Rowling. My advice is don't fail. Today, as I look over your cheerful faces, I can't help thinking back when I was roughly your age. When I was 18, the admissions officers at Columbia, Wesleyan, and Brown decided I should go to the University of Chicago. It was and remains a very intellectual place. I got a great education while pursuing a double major in history and celibacy. I can see about half of you can relate to that. I vividly recall the life-altering argument made by my own commencement speaker. Actually, I don't recall a single thing he said. You, on the other hand, are at a gorgeous moment in your lives. You're wiser than the freshmen and sexier than the faculty. In fact, at Hampden-Sydney, you're way sexier than the faculty. Plus, you have long and exciting years ahead of you. Think of where we will be in 60 years. Donald Trump and Joe Biden will still be running for president. The Rolling Stones will still be on tour. Taylor Swift will have moved on from football players and will be dating the Supreme Court. You have two incredible paths in front of you. One leads to a soulless job as a cog in a corporate machine. The other leads to permanent residence in your parents' basement. I'm here to help you explore these exciting possibilities. The usual cliches of this sort of address are pretty familiar. Follow your passion, take risks, listen to your inner voice. Your future is limitless. First, my generation leaves you with a mountain of debt, and then we give you a bunch of career derailing advice that will prevent you from ever paying it off. I'm here today to talk about something more fundamental and something core to the mission of this university, to form good men and good citizens in an atmosphere of sound learning. Unlike Hampden-Sydney, some universities behave as if forming character is not their business. They believe they're in business of advancing knowledge or training people for jobs. On those campuses, questions like, what does a good life look like? Or how can I be a better person? Are seldom asked. Happily, Hampden-Sydney has a reputation for caring very much about these core questions. A reputation for wanting to turn out graduates who are not only smart and productive, but also good neighbors, citizens, and friends. So I thought I'd use this occasion to sort of congeal all the thoughts I've had over many years about how this works. How do we become better people? How do we do character formation? I start this little inquiry citing the gospel of Ted Lasso. Early in the show, Lasso is asked, what are his goals for his soccer team, FC Richmond? He responds, for me, success is not about the wins and losses. It's about helping these young fellows be the best version of themselves on and off the field. That's a pretty good description of character formation. Trying to help each other become the best versions of ourselves on and off the field. But how exactly do you do it? How do you go about becoming a better person? Well, I think there are 6 activities that contribute. First, you have to know what good character looks like. A few years ago, as you just heard, I wrote a book in which I made the distinction between the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The book was called The Road to Character. And I learned writing that book that writing a book on character doesn't give you good character. Even reading a book on character doesn't give you good character. But buying a book on character does give you good character, so I recommend that. Now, the University of Pennsylvania scholar Angela Duckworth helpfully sorts the eulogy virtues into 3 buckets. First, there are the strengths of the heart. Strengths of the heart. The ability to have a considerate posture toward those around you, being kind, honest, generous, emotionally intelligent. Then there are the strengths of the mind. Being curious, open-minded, having good judgment, and intellectual humility. Finally, there are the strengths of the will, possessing self-control, grit, courage, and a growth mindset. When you look at these 3 buckets, you realize that moral formation is not just an intellectual business, training ourselves about how to think about right and wrong. It's also an emotional process, a spiritual process, and an active physical process. In this endeavor, training the heart may be more important than training the reasoning brain. It's educating our emotions so that we feel disgust at injustice, joyful in the presence of loving care. In this endeavor, we're also trying to inflame the soul so that it yearns more powerfully to serve some ideal. The Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl wrote that the quest for meaning is the primary motive in life. Humans yearn to be good, to do something positive for the world, but sometimes that yearning gets paved over and covered over in the daily demands of a job. The second stage of character building is learning how to see. Attention is the primary moral act. The French writer Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. The poet Mary Oliver added, "This is the first, wildest, and wisest thing I know. The soul exists, and that it is built entirely out of attentiveness." How you see the world determines how you show up in the world. If you see with the eyes of judgment, you'll find flaws in people. If you see with the eyes of distrust, you'll find threat. But if you see with compassionate eyes, you'll see imperfect people doing the best they can. A lot of the time we see the world with self-centered and self-serving eyes. The world is a play that revolves around me. Our goal should be to cast what the novelist and philosopher Iris Murdoch calls a just and loving regard upon people. Let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was having breakfast at a diner in Waco, Texas, with a 93-year-old lady named LaRue Dorsey. She'd been an educator, and she presented herself to me as a stern disciplinarian. I was a little intimidated by this formidable lady. Into the diner walks a mutual friend, a pastor who serves the homeless in Waco named Jimmy Durrell. Jimmy walks up to our booth, grabs Mrs. Dorsey by the shoulders, and shakes her way harder than you should ever shake a 93-year-old. He says to her, Mrs. Dorsey, you're the best, I love you, I love you." In an instant, that stern disciplinarian I'd been talking to turned into a bright, eye-shining 9-year-old girl. Jimmy's loving gaze brought forth a different version of her. Now, part of the reason is that Jimmy's a warmer person than I am, but he's also a pastor. And when he meets someone, he's looking at someone made in the image of God. He's looking at a soul of infinite value. He's looking at somebody so important, Jesus was willing to die for that person. Now, you can be a Christian, atheist, Muslim, Jew, or anything else, but looking at the people you meet with that level of reverence and respect is a precondition for treating them well. We want to pay deep attention to others, to be radically receptive to those who are not like us. We want to set in stone for people what it means to feel and be respected. We want to learn each other. We want to learn to see each other with just and loving grace. As Iris Murdoch put it, we can grow by looking. The third stage of character building is learning good habits. This involves living in a morally coherent community and living up to the standards and values of that community. For example, when I was a young TV pundit, I worked for the PBS NewsHour for a guy named Jim Lehrer. When I said something on the air that was smart or classy, I could see his eyes crinkle with pleasure. When I said something dumb or crass, I could see his mouth turn down with displeasure. So for 10 years, I just tried to chase the eye crinkles and avoid the mouth downturn. Jim never had to say anything to me. But through those small gestures, he taught me this is the way we do things at the NewsHour. And he taught that to everybody else. Jim has been dead for several years now. But the new NewsHour way of doing things lives on. The habits are ingrained in us and get ingrained in each new generation of people who work there. Some communities are thick and some are thin. Some leave a mark on people and change you, and some don't. Thick institutions, the ones that habituate you into becoming a better person, have a physical location and routines where people meet face to face. Such institutions have clear goals, and everybody in the organization knows their part in serving the goals. They have certain rituals to mark transitions, like today. They have retreats, and people travel together so they can see each other early in the morning and late at night, over a drink. Such organizations tell and retell their sacred origin story. They incorporate music into daily life because it's hard not to be bonded with somebody you've sung karaoke with. They often have a sacred guidebook that gets passed down. When people leave such a community, they want to bring its culture to the next place they work. And like Hampden-Sydney, they're not afraid to be themselves. They want to be a college unlike any other college in America, or a company unlike any other company, or a church or a synagogue or a mosque unlike any other. They're not afraid to be themselves. For Chicago Cubs second baseman, who was more my era than yours, Ryne Sandberg his name was Ryne Sandberg, and Major League Baseball was a thick institution for him. In 2005, he described what it was like to live within the moral ecology of Major League Baseball at his speech upon induction to the Baseball Hall of Fame. He said, "I was in awe every time I walked onto the field. That's respect. I was taught you never ever disrespected your opponent or your teammates or your organization or your manager, and never ever your uniform. Make a great play, act like you've done it before. Get a big hit, look for the third base coach, and get ready to run." Then Sandberg gestures to the older Hall of Famers who were sitting there up on stage with him. And he said, "These guys sitting here did not pave the way for the rest of us so that players could swing for the fences every time up and forget how to move a runner over to third. It's disrespectful to them, to you, and to the game of baseball we all played up growing." Sandberg concluded that his elders taught him how to play the game right. He said, "They did what they were supposed to do, and I did what I was supposed to do." That's how a moral community transmits knowledge down through the generations. Fourth, character is formed as we embrace and then struggle on behalf of some ideal. We humans have our self-centered side, but we also have the side that causes us to be inspired by visions of justice, generosity, peace, and compassion. Most of us actually don't want an easy life. We want a purposeful life, which is some man or woman tested to the limit, struggling on behalf of some ideal. We feel empty and ashamed when we see ourselves failing to live up to our ideal. I used to teach a book called The Long Loneliness by a woman named Dorothy Day, and I could see my students, religious or secular, yearning to be like her. She spent her life not only serving the poor, but living with the poor. She fed them, she clothed them, but the most important thing she did was she sat with them. She listened to them, and she respected them. She wrote, "The only answer in this life to the loneliness we're all bound to feel is community. The living together, working together, sharing together, loving God and our brother, living close to him in community so we can show our love of him." People like Day influence us to see life for what it is, a moral struggle, in which the essential question each day is, did I do ill or did I do good? The fifth stage of character building is learning moral skills. Sometimes being moral takes the form of heroic action. But mostly it's being considerate to people in the concrete circumstances of life. And this involves basic social skills. Learning how to host a gathering so everybody feels included. Knowing how to sit with someone who's depressed or grieving. Knowing how to break up with someone without crushing their heart. Knowing how to be a great conversationalist so you feel seen and heard. I have a friend who's a great listener. When you talk to him, it's like you're talking to a Pentecostal church. He's like, amen, amen. Preach that, brother, preach that, brother. He's a loud listener. I love talking to that guy. Makes me feel heard and respected. The sixth and final stage is self-confrontation. We're all sinners in some way, and each of us has one core sin. Maybe you're a people pleaser, maybe you're egotistical, greedy, judgmental. Dwight Eisenhower's core sin was he had a terrible temper. When Ike was 9, he wanted to go out trick-or-treating and his mom wouldn't let him. He threw a temper tantrum and started punching a tree in his front yard so hard that he rubbed all the skin off his knuckles. His mother sent him to his room, let him cry for an hour, and then came up to bandage his wounds. She cited a verse to him. He that conquereth his own soul is greater than he who taketh a city. When he was 76, Eisenhower said this was the most important conversation of his life because it taught him that if he was going to grow into a decent person, he had to conquer his core sin, which was his anger. And he spent the rest of his life trying to do that. During World War II, he would write lists of all the people he was angry at. And then he'd tear up the lists in a great fit of passion to try to purge himself of his anger. In the struggle against our weakness, humility is the greatest virtue because it enables us to see ourselves accurately. For many of the people we admire, the struggle against their core sin is the central drama of their life, more important than worldly success. Their character is forged in the course of this self-confrontation. They become more considerate, disciplined, other-centered through small acts of self-control. We're all stumblers in this struggle to be a better person. I once wrote a book about how to care about virtue more than money and success. And I still wound up checking my Amazon rankings every hour. Want to know how it's selling? But even a stumbler can grow better over time. We learn to lean on each other, we learn to admire and copy those we admire. And from time to time, we get to experience joy. Joy is the fruit of a well-lived life. Happiness is when we achieve some victory for ourselves. We get a raise or win a championship. We feel bigger about ourselves. But joy comes when we forget ourselves and feel part of the whole. Happiness comes from accomplishments. Joy comes from offering gifts. I know people who live so generously that joy has become their rest state, the typical way they greet the world. The great illusion of our times is that we can build systems so perfect that the people in them don't have to be good. A great weakness of our time is that we've left this kind of character building, this kind of moral formation, drift to the margins of our society. Today I've tried to clarify, at least for me, and I hope a little for you, how this thing called character building actually happens at places like Hampden-Sydney. I'm pretty sure that you'll take what you've learned here and use it to build a kinder, more generous, more courageous, and more communal world. Graduates, class of 2024, I'm looking forward to seeing all you can do. Thank you.